Good morning, folks. It's Juno here. How's everyone doing? I hope you're all well. Allow me to address that I haven't posted in a while. I've been very busy with work, and since the pandemic seems to have blown over for the most part now, it looks like it'll be business as usual. So, unfortunately, a little bit less time on my hands, and a lot of things that needed picking up when we went back in. Hopefully most of that is now done with, so I might be able to post a bit more regularly, but difficult to say at the moment. So just for today, I'm going to get something out there. I do potentially have a lot to discuss. It's hard to stop thinking about these things even if you are busy with other things. So I do have a lot of notes that I've written that I might do a separate video on and just elaborate on those notes and the thoughts that I've had. But undoubtedly some of them will come into this video as well. Things that I've been thinking about, and because they're somewhat fresh in my memory, that will influence the way that I view things, and it'll probably influence the interpretation I give to the examples or the concepts I'm putting out there. Okay, on to business. In reverse chronological order, probably the most recent thing that I noticed was how if you watch mainstream media, something that really stands out is how... Now, I know a lot of people say negative things about mainstream media, and I still hold out some belief that there's a positive aspect to it that can be extracted. But certainly one of the many negative things is this renditioning, this interpretationalism, where whatever stories they run, first the stories are very well selected to support or influence a bias, a specific interpretation of reality that they want to be true, or they want people to believe is true at least. And in addition to that, once those stories are cherry-picked and selected, they are framed and conveyed in a way that does varying degrees of protagonistic work. And so either it'll be more strongly laden and loaded with certain ideals and concepts, or it could be more deceptively or subtly suggestive. But either way, usually the message is rather consistent. Only once in a while will they attempt to suggest something new, either because it's already gaining some groundswell of popularity and they want to tap into that. Maybe they can come on top as an authority because they were one of the first ones involved from the mainstream, and therefore they become like a representative and a nucleus for that. Or because maybe it's something from their own agenda that they feel is more progressive than what they previously put out, so they're just it's an advancement on their previous position. But regardless of that fact, you can still see how it is, in essence, it's always very formulaic. It always is a little bit sort of insidious in that its presentation matches a specific view that they want to influence you into. And you can see this easily, like if you're looking at whatever channel you choose. I suppose in the UK the BBC is probably the most well-known one. You could write a checklist of things where they're putting out a piece that they're going to have to include because it's centralized in their own narrative. Regardless of what the individual story is, they're going to want to view it from specific aspects. And I just watched an advert for Wimbledon and the tennis that was coming up on the BBC. And sure enough, while they had the big name stars that they have to acknowledge at least in the advert to draw the attention to it, they also put in a lot of ethnic minority athletes, or more women, or more disabled people. And I'm sure had there been, a transgender or a homosexual athlete, they would have surely included that if possible. And what's striking is that it's so formulaic in every iteration of something they put out. This formula has to be applied, it appears. And it's checklisted, so that before you see something, that as long as you have the variance of subject matter down and you know what subject matter it's going to be, you can almost plan out the piece of advertisement they're going to put out in relation to it without ever having to have seen it. You can imagine and predict reliably what's going to be in that ad, because it is so formulaic. And by continually presenting the world in this way, it's a form of... It may, in effect, become a form of silent indoctrination. You're not exactly being told to see the world in that way. You're just always being presented it in that way. So you may, therefore, passively begin to believe that's the way the world really is. You may see this advert and think Wimbledon is full of minority athletes and disabled people, because in terms of exposure that the advertisement has given them, they're put on a similar level to the healthy male athlete, the able-bodied male athletes. However, when you look at the revenue in sport generally, you see that when it comes to the financial interest, the moneyed interest in sport, almost all of it centers around able-bodied males. And quite often white able-bodied males, dependent on the sport, but normally that would be the case, unless it was like specific physical characteristics. So, for example, in running, a lot of black athletes, African origin athletes, have some level of genetic advantage due to their natural selection, due to their environment, and due to the way that they've evolved separately from the Caucasian athletes. And due to that, then you will see that they are represented, because that's the moneyed interest then. That's where the money is being spent by the consumers. And what the advertisement's goal is behind a level of indoctrination, it still has the objective of driving consumer interest for public consumption, and therefore for the purpose of income, revenue, profit. Like the production of the advert, while it seems ideological, at the root of it, the advert is there to sell something. It's still a market economy that's driving the production of that advert, because it will result, that initial investment should result in greater sales, because people are more aware of the event, the Wimbledon event, the tennis sport, the competition. And it's in that level of competition, the observation of competition, that people extract value from sport, right? It's the same with esports. People want to see people who are performing at the top level utilizing every feasible advantage. And we find that beneficial as consumers, because through observing that, we may obtain some level of observed behavior, which we can convert into a learned behavior. And so that conversion process is valuable to us individually. So nature gives us the reward of enjoyment for watching these things, because it directly correlates to increasing our individual fitness. And in truth, all elements of the economy in some way fit into that narrative. But there's so much room for interpretation around that the ideology almost is... It's very difficult to separate, especially when people become more ideologically driven, and then for the purpose of sort of a sales-focused endeavour, the packaging has to become ideologically focused as well, because that provides the functionality of not excluding somebody based on ideological grounds from enjoying that or participating in the consumption of that. It doesn't exclude any potential customers. A business is always going to want to appeal to wherever it can achieve profit. And if profit can come from almost anywhere, then it's going to try and have the most broad appeal as possible. That isn't always the case. Ferrari doesn't try to appeal to the working man, because the working man is never going to accumulate the wealth required to become a viable customer at Ferrari. So it doesn't have any interest in doing that. But, maybe Ferrari t-shirts, Ferrari baseball caps, like there's other merchandise, there's other income streams that can be utilized to appeal to those other consumer bases. So therefore now there's an ideological tint where it could be useful to do that. And it is very insidious, though, when you constantly see this applied formula. It becomes a little disingenuous in that for something to be organic and natural, you expect a level of randomness. You expect, if these news stories are true, if this is an accurate representation of the news, if you're watching your favorite news show, if you're watching BBC News, whatever, then there should be some element of randomness to this. It shouldn't be formulaic. It shouldn't be repeatable. Things may happen cyclically, but there is still this random convergence of when and what happens. Nature shows this all the time, that in broad strokes you can say that nature adheres to some strong patterns. The way that they're formed, the way that they arrive, the chronology of that pattern is almost always, relatively random. So we come to expect a level of randomness. So it is unnatural feeling to constantly have everything presented to you in this formulaic fashion. And I think actually over time this is going to become more apparent to more and more people, and they're going to feel that something is not right, that something is wrong, it's not being presented honestly, or there's something disingenuous about the presentation of this information, that it keeps repeating just the same themes all the time, and it's not happening in an organic and natural way. And that's because the ideology really can never take a step back. It's on a level, it's insecure of its own existence, so it always needs to be pushing, being a proponent for itself. And in that you see the lack of validity in it. Like if it's always having to assert its correctness, it's always having to assert its existence and its justification for existing, then that feels very artificial. It appears to be like a life support system where something under normal circumstances would be eaten away and die off through natural means if it wasn't what was the correct pattern, the accurate pattern, the one that is represented in reality. What's interesting is you see this again in a lot of other places where something has been constructed in a certain way to try to be non-threatening and have this broad appeal. And so I feel that I think a very interesting analogy or a mirror for this type of fabricated reporting is like when you have pop songs, and you might have like a very famous boy band in the UK and Ireland used to be called Westlife, and they were big during the 90s and early 2000s, and they continually put out songs that all shared really similar features. All right, they would all be like these sort of love ballads, broadly upbeat, major key, about 3 minutes long, this very archetypal pop song construction. And then towards the end, the chorus would come back in and there would be a key change. And then these four guys who had spent the whole performance sitting on stools or chairs singing into mics would suddenly stand up. And then the key change would be their moment to sort of step forward. And this is the final push, this is the finale. And they would sing this bit extra in a slightly higher key, and then that would close the song off. And it was this formulaic, really successful pop song formula in the performance, in the writing, in the very like fabric of this boy band that is so similar to the artificial nature of journalistic reporting in mainstream media. It really contains a lot of analogous elements and themes. And just in the same way that people can be rightfully critical of popular music for really having very little like artistic substance in it, and being just a little bit on the aesthetic side, like a little bit ear pleasing, and very like overly positive, and maybe not a true representation of any sort of natural experience that's being conveyed in the music. It's just this idealized version of something, right? Like a love song is usually idealized so that it's only presenting the fantasy of love, and then by singing in a really systematized way, you're delivering it in sort of this vehicle that is super accessible for everyone. It's this tried and tested method that everybody's going to sort of accept it. No one's going to out of hand reject it. Even if people don't like it, they won't just simply reject it. It's sort of lukewarm, but some people really enjoy the lukewarm. And it's very similar when you look at the way mainstream media journalists operate. It is this way of conveying very idealized versions of events that hold some elements of facts in them. So like the chronology might be correct. Like they can say, no, I am correct because look here, I gave you the dates correctly. This is the sequence these things happened. But it's always disguised and veiled under this presupposition that these things happened because of something else, or these things happened in this way and that suggests that. For example, there was a headline recently saying, I think it was Canada Day or Queen's Day or something, and in Canada there was some sort of national celebration to do with its inclusion in the British Commonwealth and Queen Elizabeth II. And there was a few, and this is really actually quite a minor event that received a lot of exposure. There were a few quote-unquote protests involving very few people, like handful of people, where they they vandalized statues. Essentially, they tried to topple statues in an imitative fashion to what happened in the UK and the US. And you can understand the motivations and the psychology behind that. I'm not going to go into that. But the way it was framed by the BBC was that, it was kind of like a royal statues toppled due to indigenous outrage or indigenous rights abuses, something like this. What they did is they incorporated in the title the justification almost for this level of vandalism, and by framing it in that way, they were saying, well, actually no, the statues weren't vandalized. This was the logical repercussion of a great evil that was done on something relating to the people. So it almost justifies it in the way of saying this was unavoidable because of something we did. Something, the guilt doesn't lie in the people who destroyed these public art pieces. It actually is leveled at the people who, in history somewhere, individually committed some crimes against people who were indigenous to that area. This probably wasn't like an institutional thing where these criminals were, the people who were committing these crimes, these injustices, were being encouraged to do so by any institution. It may have just been that these people acting individually were somehow part of a recognized institution as an individual element, and therefore that association is now supposed to place some blame on the institutions themselves for the acts of the individuals. And because of that, and the institution's association with the British Empire, now that's a full justification for the destruction of these public artworks. Which, for me, is not satisfactory at all. That doesn't alleviate responsibility from the individuals who did this. And that doesn't even begin to explain a reasonable rationale for such a course of action. It's a very ham-handed attempt at trying to present a justification, and it isn't justified in the least. There is no reason to associate the acts of individuals to the organisations or institutions that they may have been members of, and then again the additional jump to say that somehow incriminates the Crown. And this isn't me speaking nepotistically in some hope of achieving favour. This is me trying to judge this dispassionately and not seeing this connection, and saying, in fact, on testing the validity of that connection, it is found to be woefully lacking. That there is no connection there. That somehow through this, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, now you're able to destroy public property. It's not at all logical in any way. That the logic that is trying to be achieved is so easily reduced in its effect by just examining the components of it and seeing that those pieces do not align in the way that it's being suggested they do. That other alignments are far more probable. And that these individuals who vandalised this have done so really to try and gain individual notoriety for themselves, and are just using the veil of some sort of social justice platform to do that. They want to feel individually significant. And so to do that, they're saying, well, we can just cause a big disruption by causing damage, but any time we will try to be held accountable, we can defer that accountability to something that's somehow socially delicate or taboo or difficult to talk about objectively because of the emotions involved. This happened actually, some of that frame happened the other day. I went to a friend's barbecue and there was a group of fundamentalist Christians there. In fact, it was predominantly fundamentalist Christians. I definitely read the Bible and I'm interested in a lot of elements of it, the received wisdom and the ancient traditions. I think there's a lot of very interesting content in there, and I do place a lot of faith in the Bible, in its ability to prove as a very effective education for good living for people. And if it was adopted globally, I could only predict from my position that would be a net positive to the utility and happiness of the world's population. So I'm fully in support of it. However, there are certain elements of the Bible that are not coherent with other elements. When multiple things are being said at once that are not all inclusive of each other. Now, in their individual instances, they certainly carry a level of wisdom and a level of informative knowledge there. But when you begin to construct arguments and then want to start relating it to certain chapter and verses, then you're inevitably coming into a kind of chess game where it's all about knowing all the pieces on the board, knowing all the spaces they can move into, and then just positioning yourself in the most cunning way, and using the most guile, just positioning your pieces to say, well, this says this because if you interpret it through this part, then it must be in this version of events. Whereas, again, if you just know more about the pieces or more about the movements they can make, you can go, well, actually, there's this part here that says this, and that changes the entire interpretation of this other part. And really, I believe that extracts a whole load of value out of a constructive discussion about any level of theology, or what do they call it, exegesis or something like that. The study of the Bible where you're trying to get the core messages and principles in a sort of academic discussion. And a lot of it's invalidated by this chess game, right? By this theological chess game you end up playing. Because, yeah, there are elements that can be interpreted in certain ways, but if you're just using that to reinforce your own cherished belief, then you're not looking at it dispassionately at all. And while I concede that the people I were with were certainly biblical scholars, they certainly had a very strong academic understanding of chapter and verse of the Bible, and they would look up individual chapters and they would, want to recite them and say, well, this means this. If you were to propose another version, another interpretation of the meaning of that, again, it would be a case of, well, they'll just find something else in the Bible that they think is related to this distant passage that must be referring to it, that it can only be looked at in this way. And even if you had then had knowledge and said, well, actually, I took my opinion from this other section, this other passage that seems to interpret it differently, then it becomes a whole, again, you're engaged in this chess game then. It's just about maneuverability. Who can maneuver into the most passages that seem to confirm what they're saying? Or you say, well, these passages may have been written by this prophet, but these passages came directly from Jesus himself, or this is Daniel, or suddenly then there's a priorities game being played. Well, this person knows more than this other person who said this thing, and they were mistaken. So that's highly unproductive. But what it shows you is that once you get a cherished belief there, it's very difficult to look at things dispassionately, and to be honest is an ongoing struggle with your own internal psychology. Because you're always going to be drawn to certain beliefs. This is one of the very few things I really can identify with people in socialist movements that talk about unconscious bias. I'm just happy they're focusing on the bias part, right? The unconscious thing isn't that important to me, but as long as they're willing to engage with and accept that biases definitely exist, and that they influence our thinking on so many levels. And that shouldn't be to the case where that's only a weapon we point at other people, but that should be an instructive rod for ourselves to help us stay on top of our own biases as well. So when we think, well, this would be very pleasant to think, and the real test of this is how you ask questions, right? So if you want something to be true, you tend not to ask too many questions about it. Somebody proposes something, and if it already aligns with your beliefs or something that you think would be beneficial for you, then suddenly you are in immediate agreement. You do not investigate any further, right? You don't want to destabilize this potentially positive thing for you. There's a conscious bias there for you not to do that. Maybe it's unconscious. Maybe you didn't even realize you're doing it, right? But I don't think the conscious or unconscious part is important. I think it's just recognizing the bias and then going on to say, well, if we can all understand that's the case, then every party who is ever involved in investigation should concede first that they have some level of bias, and then it's up to them for the productivity and efficiency of that investigation to investigate their own preferable outcomes. So if you're going to investigate something, let's say you and I had a disagreement and one of us held something to mean something and one of us held something to mean something else, you may find it productive to try and inquire as to my belief and my understanding. But if I was to begin inquiring into yours, you might not actually associate that with productive discussion. You might see that as more of an undermining strategy, that you may have gone out of your way to want to understand my position, but actually if I'm inquiring about yours, that's simply me trying to remove validity by trying to pick holes in your argument, right? It immediately begins to change your mentality about the question, whether or not you want it to be true. And I think this is especially poignant when we look at things like race, where people are interested in seeing racial statistics and studies as long as it adheres to whatever it is they're believing already. But whenever you go forward and you propose, okay, we want to look into racial inequality in some area, then the aim of the investigation, at least currently socially, never appears to focus on investigating how equal something is. It's always the level of inequality. It's always framed in such a way that we want to find out the thing that we don't like, so then we can say that we like something else. So that I want to find there to be inequality because then I can do something about that, and that will adhere to my own personal opinion that inequality is everywhere, and that we need to act now. And through that requirement, now you need to do something. I've found the information. Now you go ahead and get out there and do something because I said so. This is one of the beauties of it, is like, if you get smart enough, you can become absolutely lazy, because now you just are able to spin interpretations that always result in somebody else having to do the thing you should be doing. But going back to this argument about the bias and the cherished belief, it's all very well and good when somebody is supporting your view. You never investigate what they're saying. You always accept it and say, that's another verification that I was always correct. Or it's something you want to hear. This is the issue again with flattery. You want to hear good things about yourself, so you never investigate the person telling you about them. Someone says, "Oh, you're so clever," and then you go, "Well, why am I clever? What am I doing that's clever? Are you sure I'm clever?" People go, "Oh, come on, just take a compliment." No, if you called me an idiot, would I not ask you, well, how am I an idiot? How am I stupid? What are you saying? What are you talking about? Right? It's only the things we want to hear that don't get investigated. It's the things we don't want to hear that we're always trying to undermine and find some fault in, so we can prove to ourselves they're not true. But how about trying to get validity over the things we do want to be true? How about investigating those and picking holes in that? Picking holes in the things we do want to be true. That's something we're never going to do. Society is not emotionally mature enough to ever engage in that in any meaningful way. And there are people out there who may say, well, look at the social justice movement, that's exactly what it does. But I don't think it is what it does, because the people involved in such a social justice movement always use that lever to influence and coerce others into doing something for them. It's always just used as leverage against other people. It's never used for internal change. It's never the ones the proponents of social justice ever saying that they're going to now deliver on social justice and make a more equal and better world through themselves. It's always they're going to do some advocacy work, and they're going to tell other people what to do. They're going to go influence somebody. When really, if they're saying that the fault is internal, then surely that's with them as well. But I think on some level, maybe they come to the belief then that, I already know that there's a fault, therefore it can't be in me, because if it was in me, I wouldn't be. If it was in me, I'd be aware. But the other people aren't aware. That's how I know that it's not in them. It must be in them. Sorry, I'm even confusing myself now on exactly the thought process that's going on in people with this belief. However, what isn't confusing is the immediate benefit they do get once they can attain what appears to be a morally superior position, which is, I'm so humble that I'm able to admit all these faults about my people. Not in me personally, obviously. I'm fine, but my people who I'm a representative of, I can admit the faults in them. And they should really listen to me so they can change because I told them to. So if you believe then, as that individual, that your people inherently have this issue, how is it that it doesn't apply to you? Even if you now have knowledge of it, how is it doesn't apply? And if it does, why do you need to advocate for others to change when you can change? The internal organization of yourself can be reconstituted to somehow make it so that's no longer the case. And then maybe through your actions, maybe through what you do in the world and your beliefs, maybe not having to proselytize to people about those things, will actual change come. Because this is the thing, you always see these groups looking for somebody else to do something about it, right? And they'll say, well, I am doing something about it by trying to get somebody else to do something about it. That's me doing something about it. No, it's not. No, it's not. Basically, if you were to tell somebody else to do something about it, and then they just went, I'm going to tell somebody else to do something about it, you would absolutely have every right to accuse them of not doing anything. You're just passing the buck here. Hold on. What they will say is, no, but I have no power. This is the problem. I have no power. But you just made everybody listen to you. How is that not power? You just claim moral superiority. How is that not power? You're using this influence to sell your vitamin brand online. How is that not power? You're getting all these clicks, all this attention, all these likes and all these views. How is that not power? Right? You're just playing some kind of strange mental game where you're convincing yourself, I don't have to do anything because that would be hard. I'll just imagine everybody else can do it for me. Who's the privileged one now? Where is that change you want to see if you're not living it? And by all means, you can admit, you can say, I'm the worst of them, and the worst thing is that I can't even do anything about it. Like, I'm the lowest, therefore I will see if I can ask someone above me to help. Maybe that would be a more honest representation. But to claim some level of moral superiority and to demand others act on your behalf is the height of privilege. You're not a representative of these groups, because if you were, you'd have to initiate that by admitting your own guilt, and that guilt would be a debt in which you had to do something to alleviate. But you're not going to do anything. All you're going to do is tell other people to do stuff. That's not doing something. Nobody builds a bridge by telling other people to build bridges. Right? If everyone does that, does the bridge get built? No. Somebody actually has to stop asking and stop telling and start, laying brick. Putting down piles. Using earthworks. Like, there has to be something physical at the end of that. And nobody who told that person to do that really contributed in any way or can claim credit for building that bridge. Yet the people out there who are telling others that they have to change and institutional racism and things are so unequal, like, they're not doing anything, yet they're absolutely the ones claiming to be, these advocates for change. They're claiming that they've done something. They changed the world through complaining. So anyway, boy bands. Yeah. It's very formulaic. It's very artificial, manufactured and constructed. And you'd think on some level, people would feel that. When they're told stuff, they'd just notice, This doesn't feel that natural. But I suppose there's not very much natural in the world now, so when you're out of context like that, maybe it is harder to see. On some level, we keep the cattle disorientated. We move them from field to field, and then when we take them to the abattoir, they're kept in a dark room, in a dark truck, and then they're sort of herded from one place to the other. Even in the olden days, the cow was pulling, the ox was pulling the plough, but all it ever looked at, all it was ever focusing on was whatever carrot was being held out in front of it, or trying to avoid the stick behind it, the whip. And it's that distraction, it's that consumption of mental processing power in something really insignificant that keeps the farmer in business. Because the ox he just doesn't think. He's always kept distracted with more immediate concerns. And it does work, right? The farm works. And the food is made and the people are fed and the ox keeps getting his food. So ostensibly maybe it does seem like a good deal. But is it only that way because the ox doesn't know any different? Thanks very much, guys. I'll see you around.